Sedra. Okay.
Okay, go.
Okay. This week's Sedra is Parshas Shlach. Now, first, I just want to apologize. I know it's been a while since I last gave share. Last week it was a last-minute cancellation. Unfortunately, I was in the hospital and I'm recovering now, and so Be'ez Hashem, I'll have a full recovery, and so just hopefully that we'll be able to have the share every week as we did in the past. Okay, the Parshas Shlach begins by telling about the episode of Meraglim, of the spies from that were sent out by Moshe and to search out the land of Canaan. And Kulam Anoshim, initially, these people were considered outstanding individuals. Rashi B'nai Yisrael Haima, they were leaders of their tribes. And then when they went, according to some of the Maimorei Chazal, the moment they left, they already had a bad attitude. And when they came back, they gave a report attempting to discourage the Jewish people from entering Eretz Yisrael. And they talked about the strength and the military might that the Canaanites had, and how it would be impossible for the Jewish people to overcome that advantage of strength, of military strength, that the Canaanites had over the Jewish people. And they said, Ki chazaku mimenu. And the simple reading of Ki chazaku mimenu is that the Canaanites are stronger than us. However, the Gemara, in both in Erchen, I think Daf Tezvav, and in Sota, I think Daf Lamed Hey, says that it discusses what was the sin of the Canaanites. What was the sin that made them have such a severe punishment? And it was a punishment not just for them, but a punishment for all of the Jewish people. And the Gemara first says, and the Gemara seems to conclude that way, that the main sin that led to the severe punishment was the fact that they talked Lashon Hara. The fact that they talked against Eretz Yisrael, against the land of Israel, against the Jewish people going to the land of Eretz Yisrael. And the Gemara says, if that is the severe punishment that one gets for talking against Eitzim Va'avanim, for inanimate objects, can you imagine how severe is the sin of talking against a person? But then the Gemara raises an objection. And the Gemara says, perhaps the reason they were punished so severely was not because of the Lashon Hara, because of the talk that they gave, but it was because of the heresy that they expressed. And the Gemara makes a drasha. Now there are three texts, three versions of the text as to what the Gemara is saying. The simple version is The pasuk says, Ki chazaku mimenu, al tikra mimenu ella mimenu. Now, the word mimenu could mean from us, and the word mimenu can mean from him. The simple reading of the Torah is ki chazaku mimenu, that he, the Canaanite nation, is stronger than us. But the Gemara says, al tikra mimenu ella mimenu. It's the same word. Do not read it. Mimenu, us, stronger than us, but stronger than him. In other words, they implied that the Canaanites were stronger than God. And that is one of the strongest forms of heresy, besides being stupidity, that could be implied. So the Gemara suggests that perhaps the severe punishment was because of the heresy that they expressed. And the Gemara concludes that while that was a great sin, the severe punishment was because they were motzi diba ra al aretz, because of their negative talk that they made against Eretz Israel, against the land of Israel. So that's one text that the Gemara says. The other text is, well, the first text said, Al tikra ki chazaku mimenu ela mimenu. Do not say that he is stronger than us, but say that he is stronger than him. The other text is very similar, but it just says, Al tikra, do not read, Al tikra mimenu, do not read from us, ella, but from him. Why did some change the text? Because when we read the word mimenu to mean from him, stronger than God, we are not changing the meaning of tikazaku, because he is stronger. And then Rashi has a third text. Rashi's text is ki chazaku mimenu, means that he is kaviyachal. That doesn't say don't read it, just it means stronger than God. Now the word al tikra, when it says do not read it a certain way, but read it another way, that doesn't mean that the first way is wrong. But it means there's an additional way to read it. A matter of fact, almost always, and I think I could say always, when it says al tikra, do not read it one way, but read it a second way, it means to say it's true. The first way is the main way, but there is a second way also. In other words, when it says al tikra, do not read it, it means don't read it only this way. There is an additional way to read it. So in a sense, what the Gemara is saying, do not read that it's only telling us that the Meraglim were saying, that the spies were saying, that the Jewish people are stronger than us, stronger than that the Canaanites are stronger than us. But there's an additional reading that they said that the Canaanites are stronger than God. So we have to understand, what did they actually say? And what did they imply? How was it said? Now, and then, even more disturbing is the Rambam. The Rambam, in his introduction to his commentary on the Mishnah, says that when the Gemara uses the term al tikra, now many disagree with the Rambam in this. Certainly the Maharal seems to disagree, but the Rambam says al tikra doesn't mean that we actually should read it differently. He says it was just a mnemonic. In those days, they didn't have printed Gemaras. They didn't have books which had the words of our sages written, because the oral law initially had to remain oral. It could not be written down. Only later on, when it became absolutely necessary, were the words of the sages put into writing. But until the time of the Mishnah and until the time of the Gemara, of the Talmud, the oral tradition, the words of the sages, had to be given over orally and could not be put into a text. So because of that, the only text that the Jewish people had was the Tanakh, was the Bible. So sometimes the Chachamim, the rabbis, would associate some of their sayings with words in the Bible, even though there was really no connection between the true meaning of those words in the Bible and what the sages were saying. It was a way to remind people of what the sages said. So the Rambam says that whenever it says al tikra, do not read it only this way, read it another way. The real meaning is the first meaning. The second meaning is only to express an idea that the words of the Tanakh were used to serve as a mnemonic, that the people should be able to remember the words of the sages. There are those who say that according to the Rambam, it's not just limited to Al Tikra, the Maritzchias, but it's true about all asmachtas, because many rabbinic laws are associated with words in the Bible, in Tanakh. And the Maritzchias says that according to the Rambam, the Ramban, the Ritva, they disagree. But they say that according to the Rambam, the sages only use those words to serve as a reminder to the people as to what the enactment of the sages were. But really, that was not the meaning of the words. The Ramban disagrees. He says it's these words that allowed the sages to make certain enactments. But in any case, according to the Rambam, it's not the real meaning of the word at all. It isn't even a real alternative explanation. So the question is, what is the Gemara's question according to the Rambam? What is the Gemara saying? And the Gemara says, how do you know that the spies were punished so severely with a horrible death? Because of Lashon Hara, because of the nature of the evil talk that they had. Maybe it was because of the kfira, because of the heresy of saying that the Canaanites were stronger than God. Chas v'shalom. Where do we see that according to the Rambam? How do we know that? Now, and even according to Rashi, and Rashi's opinion seems to be that the main explanation was not they're stronger than us, but they're stronger than God. Take a look at Rashi and Chumash. The question is, why did the Torah employ an expression that could mean both? Why wasn't the Torah clearer about it? Now, but I have another question, and that is, when you take a look at the way the Gemara here presents the episode of Meraglim, there is a certain emphasis that what the Meraglim said was that God was weak. Now, who are we dealing with? It's not, the Torah doesn't tell us that they became atheists. The Torah is saying they recognized God. And God was the one who took them out of the land of Egypt. And God is the one who divided the sea for them and performed all the miracles for them. They recognized who God was. But they felt that God did not have the power to overcome the Canaanites. How are we to understand such a thing? And we're not dealing with people who were were totally irrational beforehand. We're dealing with people who are leaders of the Jewish people. And to a certain degree, before they embarked on this journey to search out the land of Canaan, they were considered anoshim tzadikim. They were considered righteous. And all of a sudden, they come up with this idea, which is ludicrous, that God is weak, weaker than the Canaanites. How are we to understand? What is the psychology behind it? Okay, they had their negias. They didn't want to enter Eretz Yisrael. But how, in 1 minute, they could say such a thing? Change over completely. And then, even when Moshe pleads with God, God wanted to punish the Jewish people for following the lead of the spies. So Moshe pleads on behalf of the Jewish people. And he says, show mercy to them. Va'ata yigdal koach Hashem. Yigdal na koach Hashem. Now, please, God, let your strength become greater. There is this focus about weakness and strength of God. Even Moshe Rabbeinu talks about God's strength become greater. How are we to understand it? What is going on here? Now, I think we could take notice. I mentioned this explanation of the Palgemayim. Palgemayim was written by the Nesivos in the Palgemayim was written by Nesivos as a commentary on Eicha. The Palgamayim says a very interesting explanation. Eichad says, Lo mi pielyon teitze haros v'hatov. Not from the mouth of God does the bad and the good come out. But when he talks about the bad, so the in Eicha, Yirmiyahu, who wrote Eicha, he uses the plural form. Haros, the bad in the plural form. But when he talks about the good, he uses the singular form, hatov. Not from God does the bad things and the good come. So why is it that in regard to the bad things, the plural form is used, and in regard to the good, the singular form is used? I would explain it, if not for the Nesivos, although I think the Nesivos explanation, the Palgamayim's explanation, is an amazing explanation. But if I wasn't aware of what the Palgamayim said, I would have explained it very simply. It's based on the perception of man. When it comes to good, that a person is beneficiary of, whether it's good from God or good from other people, it's all one thing. It's not many good things. But when it comes to something bad, when do you undergo bad experience, every moment of it is seen as something, a new bad thing. The Gemara in Brachas, Talmud in Brachas says, Motze Isha Motze Tov. And then it says, Motze Ani Esi Isha Marmi Mavis. One who finds a spouse, finds his wife, finds a woman, Motze Tov, he finds good. But then it mentions a contradiction. Motze Ani Esi Isha Marmi Mavis. I am finding my spouse worse than death. How do you resolve the contradiction? So the Talmud says it depends. What type of spouse? There's certain types of spouse that when you find that spouse is good. But there are certain spouses that sometimes it could be equated with death. It's true, Shlomo HaMelech, he was a man, so he talks about finding a woman. I'm sure the truth is also in the reverse. A woman could say about a husband, I found a man. Finding a man is good. And sometimes, unfortunately, a woman could say, finding the man is worse than death. And the Vilna Gaon explains, he is troubled. He says, he who finds a woman found good. One who found a woman found good. But when it talks about bad, he says, I am finding a woman worse than death. In other words, if one has a good spouse, whether it's a husband who has a wife that's good, or a wife who has a husband that's good. So all the good, the Vilna Gaon says, appears as one thing. It's just a continuation of the good that the person found. But when it comes to that which is bad, so every moment they see it as another bad thing. That's just the mentality. It doesn't have to do with men or women. It doesn't have to be limited to marriage. It's in every area. That is the psychological perspective of people. And I think that we could have answered the question, because when we view good, we had good before and we have good now. It's all one thing. But when it comes bad, another bad thing. That's just the psychology. Therefore, it says, Lo mi piel yon teitze haros v'hatov. In other words, the pasuk is addressing it to the perception of a person. When it comes to bad, everything, every moment of it is a new bad thing. When it comes to good, it's all one good thing. However, the Palgemayim explains it differently. The Palgemayim says that Lo mi piel yon teitze haros v'hatov. He says there are two types of bad and there are two types of good. He says when one sins, that's one type of bad. The bad that man does. But then there is the bad that is the result of the sin. People get punished for the sins they do. So Lo mi piel yon, it is not from the mouth of God that the bad is done. Not the bad that I do is bad. Not the sin that I do was imposed upon me by God, and not the punishment that I had as a result of the sin came from God. But when it comes to good, so God does not force me to do good, but the reward I get for doing good comes from God. So it's in the singular form. In other words, the reward, that comes from God. But what doesn't come from God is the good that I do. That's something I choose to do. That's freedom of will. Man has freedom of will to do bad and to do good. And God does not impose that upon him. And the explanation of the Palgemayim is the following. The Palgemayim means to say that God, when we encounter bad circumstances, certainly on a national level, everybody is writing books about the Holocaust. Everybody is writing books why bad things happen to good people. But according to the Palgemayim, what happens when we act in a bad manner, it's not that God brings negative things upon us, but to a certain sense, God withdraws and lets nature take its own course. And that's why in certain generations, that's in this world, that's why in certain generations, there is one reaction, in other generations, another reaction, even though the sin might have been the same sin. And the circumstances might have been the same circumstances in terms of what I did. In every generation, there are those who want to destroy us. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyadam. God saves us. You think there was only one Hitler, Yamach Shemo? But God interfered. And the degree of interference is dependent on the way we act. So God does not impose upon us the bad things that happen, even if it's as a result of our sin. but to a certain degree, God withdraws. And this could be understood with the beginning of the Nefesh HaChaim. Reb Chaim Volozhiner, and the Nefesh HaChaim says that God gave man the ability to control the upper worlds, which then control, this is of course the Kabbalistic perspective. It's the mystical tradition that God gave man to control the upper worlds, the ability to control, that then impose things on the lower worlds. It mentions Al Musakise in the prophetic vision of the Kisei, of the throne of God. Al Musakise Kmar Adam. There is like the appearance of man. In other words, God allows man to a certain degree to control him. Man has the ability to figuratively tie the hands of God. And he has the ability, on the contrary, to empower God. Now it's obvious that's a limitation that God placed upon himself. At any moment, God could break the ropes that man figuratively tied God's hands with. But God generally allows man to have control over what happens in this world, unless man allows God to interfere. And when we act properly, we tie those ropes. And we give God the ability to interfere. V'hakadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. And I think that perhaps this is the same idea. When we say the pasuk, the simple reading of the pasuk is the simple reading of the pasuk, and the Nefesh HaChaim adds the word baruch. When we make a bracha, what does the word baruch mean? The word baruch means tosfis koach, additional strength. When we say baruch atah Hashem, blessed is you, God, we are giving God additional strength. Of course, God doesn't need us to give him additional strength. But that was part, I assume, of tzimtzum. God, in a sense, placed limitations upon himself. And he gave man, Reb Chaim Volozhin says, with kochos, strengths, godly strengths, in controlling what takes place in the world. And so I think this is perhaps, how did the Meraglim change overnight? These were Anoshim tzadikim. We understand, we know many cases where people went through the Holocaust, people who initially were very, very religious, very, very devout, but because of the circumstances they encountered, they gave up temporarily some of their commitment. Questions arose in their mind, and we cannot find fault with them. We have to wonder, How would we have reacted if chas v'shalom we would have been in the same circumstances? And even that, it was over a period of time. It wasn't overnight that their attitudes changed. And very often later on, it changed again. So how are we to understand it? That the Meraglim, the spies, they were leaders of the Jewish people beforehand. They didn't undergo a Holocaust. How is it overnight that should change dramatically? And especially in the view of the fact that they didn't become atheists. But the answer is that they recognized the limitations that God placed upon himself. And they did not have confidence in the Jewish people. And they felt that it's because the Jewish people who went through so much and saw so many miracles that were at Maimon Har Sinai, and they felt that they were not yet, and they should have been on a higher level at that point. And because they were not on a higher level as of yet, they felt, in a sense, that the Jewish people tied the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu figuratively. And that's the idea. Ki chazaku mimenu. The Canaanites are stronger than us. What does it mean, stronger than us? Stronger than us means they felt that the Jewish people might have tied the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu figuratively, and they did not believe. Probably because of ulterior motives, because they didn't want to believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would break those bonds to help the Jewish people. And I think that what they didn't understand or didn't want to understand was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, yes, he lets the Jewish people tie his hands at times. But there are times when, even if it's not warranted, even when we didn't change our ways to the degree that we should, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu breaks those ropes that we put figuratively on his hands. And I remember many years ago, I had to be in Amsterdam. And in certain areas of Amsterdam, instead of taking a bus, you have to take a boat. So I was in a boat, and of course, I was wearing my yarmulke. Today we are urged, I hear, by Jewish politicians not to wear a yarmulke. Anyway, I was wearing my yarmulke, and this fellow comes over to me and he started talking to me. He was a Jew. And in the process, I asked him, "What does your father do?" He said to me, "My father is a shomer. He's a watchman." You know what he meant? Gemara talks about when someone hires somebody to take care of his animals. Shomer chinam, shomer sachar. What do you mean? My father's a shomer. I said, you mean he's a policeman? I know in Borough Park, the Jewish police force is called the Shomrim. And I think even in other cities, the Jewish policemen have their own organization called Shomrim. So yes, is he a policeman? No. He's a Shomer Kashrus. Apparently, in that community, wherever he was from, what we call a mashgiach, they call a shomer. Question is, what is the difference between the word shomer and mashgiach? A shomer, he has responsibility. If I have to watch something, I have a responsibility. A mashgiach, I just watch and I give a report. All our mashgichim should be shomrim. Hopefully they are. A mashgiach looks, and we talk about shomer Yisrael, shomer sheirish Yisrael. God is the shomer Yisrael. I know there are politicians that now call themselves shomer Yisrael. At best, they're mashgiach, and I'm not sure not even that. So they're shomrim. God is a shomer Yisrael, but sometimes God is a mashgiach min hachalonos. He's hidden, but even when he's hidden, he's watching, because there comes a point where he understands it's time to break the ropes. The future continuation of the Jewish people is dependent upon it. And I think that is something that the Meraglim didn't want to understand. They could have understood it. And they felt the Jewish people were not deserving of God interfering on their behalf. And they felt that all the promises that God made was based on a certain form of conduct. And consequently, they said, the Canaanites are stronger than us. Al tikra mimenu ella mimenu. They're stronger in a certain sense than God. Not that God could be, but that God is regularly, when he allows his hands to be tied by the Jewish people. But there is another mistake, and this was part of the heresy of the Meraglim. But there was another mistake they made. I mentioned many times the thought that my uncle mentioned. On the one hand, the Rambam paskins ein Yisrael negolen el b'tshuva. The Jewish people will only be redeemed through tshuva. On the other hand, the Rambam seems to paskin. The Rambam seems to paskin that we have to look forward to Mashiach coming at any moment. That attitude, by the way, is not just the Lubavitch attitude. That the Reb Chaim felt that was the attitude of the Rambam. That's the way he understood the Rambam. Achakalo b'chol yom sheyavo. That we say, it doesn't mean that he'll necessarily be there tomorrow or today. But we have to look forward to his coming. And if we have to look forward to his coming, we have to believe that he can come. How can you look forward to his coming today and tomorrow if you don't believe he could come today and tomorrow? So how could the Rambam on one hand say, "Ein Yisrael Nigolan El B'Tshuva," that the Jewish people will only be redeemed with tshuva, with repentance, with returning to God? And the other hand say that we have to look forward to God, to the Jewish people being redeemed today and tomorrow. How is it possible? How are we to understand it? My uncle said that our belief in the coming of Mashiach is grounded in our belief in the Jewish people. We have to believe that the Jewish people could do tshuva, could return to God at any moment. Today, tomorrow, at any moment. Many of our beliefs, many of our fundamental beliefs are grounded in our belief in the Jewish people. The Meraglim didn't have faith in the Jewish people. In a sense, of course, explicitly, they only talked against Eitzim V'Avonim. They only talked against the land of Israel. Ochelis Yoshveha, a land that devours its residents. But in a certain sense, by implication, they were not just talking against the land of Eretz Yisrael. That was explicitly. But they were also talking against the Jewish people, because they were saying that the Jewish people do not act in a manner, they didn't say, they implied. The Jewish people do not act in a manner that God should interfere on their behalf. So consequently, this was the Lashon Hara on one hand, but this was the heresy also, because our belief in God, in God's acting on our behalf, and God's keeping his commitment is grounded not just that we know that God will keep his commitment, regardless of the circumstances, but it's also grounded in our belief in the Jewish people, that the Jewish people will return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and can return momentarily. As the Rambam said, Ein Yisrael Nigolan El B'Tshuva, the Jewish people will only be redeemed with tshuva, with repentance, with return, if they return to God. But then he quickly adds, Uchvar Hefticha Torah, the Torah already promised, Shasidin Yisrael Lasos tshuva, that the Jewish people will do tshuva. That is part of many of the basic beliefs that we have. And I just want to add the one text in the Gemara that was somewhat difficult. The one text was, Ki chazaku mimenu, al tikra ki chazaku mimenu, ela mimenu. In other words, it's not just the word mimenu that's changed, meaning he is stronger than us, but he is stronger than him, than God. But the mimenu doesn't just change the meaning of al tikra, of mimenu, it changes the meaning of the whole pasuk. And the question is, how does it change the meaning of the whole pasuk? Now, it's interesting. The Torah tells us in this Sedra, when Moshe gave instructions to the Meraglim, so he told them his chazaktem ulekachtem meprioritz. And the simple explanation of his chazaktem ulekachtem meprioritz, because the fruit of Eretz Yisrael was so heavy and so big, and in a sense they had to give themselves psychological strength to carry those fruit. However, the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, he says something altogether different. The Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says that they should make a kinyan chazaka in Eretz Yisrael. What is chazaka? Chazaka is, let's say, a person buys a house or buys a property. Property is better. So in order for the transfer to officially take place, he has to demonstrate ownership over the piece of land. He can build a fence, he can build a wall. That's a demonstration of ownership. He can put a lock on the door, perhaps even lock the door. That's a demonstration of ownership. When one has a field and one acquires a field, so even though he makes whatever deals with the owner of the field, the transfer takes place. One of the ways is through a demonstration of ownership. How does he demonstrate ownership? When he openly goes, and this is one way, there are many ways to demonstrate ownership, and he takes some of the produce from the field. That's also a demonstration of ownership. So the way the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says, and what demonstration of ownership, that shows strength. It shows that I demonstratively show that I am the owner of this field. So Moshe Rabbeinu told the Meraglim, told the spies, be demonstrative about the ownership of Eretz Yisrael. The Rogachover says that's why there were 12 spies, because they represented the Jewish people. They represented the Jewish people. They represented the Jewish people. So that's why there had to be 12 spies, because he wanted to sanctify the land of Israel, not through kibush, not through conquest, but through chazaka. The land of Israel can be sanctified in one of two ways. One way is through kibush, through conquest. And ultimately, in the first Beis HaMikdash, in the time of the first Commonwealth, it was sanctified through conquest. Matter of fact, the Rambam says that the kedusha, the sanctification. The Rambam says the sanctification of the land of Israel was the first Commonwealth was only temporary. Why? Because it was sanctified through conquest, through Joshua conquering the land. And conquest can only sanctify as long as the conquest lasts. And once the Jewish people were driven from the land by the Babylonians, the land of Israel lost its sanctification. However, when Ezra went up in the time of the second temple, and he sanctified the land, it was not sanctified with conquest. Ezra did not go with an army. He went with builders. He went with farmers. They demonstrated ownership. Demonstrated ownership over the land, not through conquest. When you demonstrate through building, through farming, that type of demonstration is showing identification with the land. If the identification is limited to conquest, it ends with the conquest. So the sanctification of Ezra continued even after the Romans invaded and took control of the land of Israel. Now, there is a question that's asked in the first temple. Why is it that after the conquest, when the Jews settled the land, and each Shevet, each tribe got its section, and each person got his portion, so we have Chazak also. Why wasn't there a permanent Dusha? Because of what happened after the conquest. And the answer is the settling on the land that comes as a result of conquest is only considered an occupation, is viewed as an occupation. And the impact of occupation only lasts as long as the control on the land lasts. But, so it's true, Yoshua divided the land 14 years. But after that, the land was settled. People were working on the land. But that was seen. Of course, it belonged to the Jewish people. God gave it to Avraham Avinu, but it had the appearance of perpetuating the conquest. So the Kedusha was a temporary Kedusha. But when Ezra went up, and Ezra sanctified the land by people working on the land, that was permanent, because that was an identification with the land in a manner that conquest couldn't do. That was a permanent identification with the land. So the Rogatchover explains, Targum Yonason is saying like this. He says, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted that the first Dusha, the first sanctification, should be a permanent Dusha. So he wanted the Meraglim, the spies, to sanctify the land. They, the representatives of the Jewish people, should sanctify the land through chazakah, through a demonstration of ownership. And taking fruit demonstratively from the land is a demonstration of ownership. But a demonstration of ownership of the land only works if you really believe that you have legitimate ownership over the land. But if I just walk into someone's house and I lock the door, I don't acquire the house. It's only if the terms were worked out and it's legitimate, then the chazakah works. The problem was the Meraglim did not believe that the land belonged to them. They believed the land belonged to the Canaanites. So Moshe Rabbeinu wanted initially there should be a chazaka. And then even the kibush, the conquest that comes afterwards, would be a continuation of that chazaka, of that demonstration of ownership, of that identification with the land. But if the identification with the land begins with conquest, then it ends when the conquest ends also. And I think perhaps we could say, as an alternative explanation, when it says, when it says, Ki chazaku mimenu, the simple reading, Ki chazaku mimenu, because they are stronger than us. In other words, chazaka is showing strength of ownership. But the spies did not believe that what they did was strength of ownership. They felt that the Canaanites were the true owners. So following the Yonasan ben Aziel, we could explain the pasuk, Ki chazaku mimenu, that their strength was greater than our strength. We were not able to show ownership unless we show strength over the land more than they had. So, and then the Gemara says, Al tichazaku mimenu, al tikra mimenu el mimenu. In other words, the demonstration that they are stronger than God. So it changes the meaning, not just of the word mimenu, it changes the meaning of the whole pasuk. The whole pasuk now means, in the new explanation, that they felt, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, that the Canaanites, because of the Jewish people, because of their lack of faith in the Jewish people, they thought that the Canaanites were stronger than God. Not that God could be, but stronger than a God would be. And of course, this was heresy because of their attitude regarding God and their attitude regarding the Jewish people. Okay.
If anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat. Under Ezra, wasn't the building of the Beis Hamikdash symbolic of establishing a Bailas and Kiyum to a greater degree? So was this how with the completion of Bayis Sheni?
Well, this was building, whatever they built was part of it, but we're not talking about Dushas Mikdash. We're talking about the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael. It was the building of the walls, the building of the people working on the land. All that is chazaka.
Okay. The Jewish people believed the Meraglim, and therefore there was the immediate punishment.
There was an immediate punishment. However, there is a problem because in the Megillus Tainus, it's mentioned that the Meraglim died on the two texts. One says the 17th of Elul, the other says, I think, the 7th of Elul. So there are two. So the question is, so the Rush says, he says they were, because the Torah says that those who spoke against the land of Israel, the Torah gives the impression they died right away. So the Rush suggests in his Chuvas that there were two sets of those speaking against Eretz Yisrael. those who died right away and those who died in Elul. This probably could be understood with the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's Shita, but the rest doesn't say that. Rabbi Akiva's opinion is there weren't 12 spies, but there were 24 spies, 2 from each Shevet, but the Torah only lists the main ones. So it could be one set of 12 died right away, as the simple reading of the Pasuk is, and the other set of 12 could be died afterwards in Elul. But some say that means that right away they were overcome with some terrible diseases with their tongue and everything, and but they were in pain from Tisha B'Av, the episode of the Meraglim had in Tisha B'Av, until the 7th or the 17th of Elul.
Okay, another question. Can you please explain the Palgemayim one more time?
Yes, the Palgemayim says that God, the punishments that we receive in this world are not directly from God. What is the world? There is nature. And when God removes himself, a lot of bad things happen. There are a lot of people out there that want to cause, from talking now from a Jewish perspective, that we see there are a lot of people out there that want to cause harm to the Jews. There are diseases out there. There are all kinds of problems. But God interferes and prevents. When we sin, God sometimes just doesn't interfere. It's not that he brings these diseases on us. He created the world. And in the creation of the world, there are diseases. He created man. And men have freedom of choice. And they adopt all kinds of views, some of which are very harmful. And unless God interferes, they take action against us. So this is what the Palgemayim says. The Palgemayim says, Mi piel yon lo seitze haros. God does not cause me to sin. But the bad things that happen to me as a result of my sin in this world is only because nature, God didn't interfere with nature. It's not that God brought those bad things upon me. V'hatov, God does not force me to do good. But the good that the reward that I get in this world for the mitzvos that I did, that God did give me. So God is not involved in one form of good. He doesn't force me to do good, but he is involved in the good that I get as a result of the good that I did do. When it comes to the bad, God neither forces me to do bad, but God also does not punish me in this world directly. He allows nature to take its course, and he doesn't interfere.
And then I think this question is a little bit, might have a long answer, but was it a mistake to send the spies?
The simple reading of Chumash Dvarim would seem that it was a mistake to send the spies. That's a case of God not interfering. Yeah.
Yeah, we have from a bunch of years ago. It's not on YouTube, but we have Rabbi giving a share about that, I think. But it's not on YouTube.
Yeah, okay.
We discussed the difference between Shlach and Devarim.
That's right. That's right. It's actually, I think there might have been a quick reference to it last year in the show also.
Yeah, it might have been. Okay, there's no more questions on here that I see. Thank you very much. Everyone have a good week. And Richard Shem will be here next Sunday, same time, same link.
Yeah. Okay, everything should go well.
Amen.
I'll be in touch.